There.
I guess we're just gonna have to start all over again. Thank you so much, Darius Pickett, for letting us know. We had no audio. We was going in.
We done told the whole story.
We'll start over. We'll start over. That's no problem. Well, look, welcome to a conversation on Juneteenth with my friend, the authoress,
Hello.
Cynthia O. And you have a book coming out soon, don't you?
I do. It's called From Corporate to Calling.
Look at that.
Yeah.
From corporate to calling.
Yeah.
Sounds like a familiar story.
Yeah.
I love it though. I love it. I have learned so much from this lady right here. So I'm excited to get your book and for everybody else to learn. So
I'm
we can go
excited.
from corporate to
I'm
calling.
definitely excited about the release.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, we were just about, all right, all right. So they can hear us now. Yay. So reshare, come back in, okay? Please reshare this live. We had a little technical snafu at the beginning where you guys were not hearing us, but please reshare. We're having a conversation about Juneteenth, and we would love for you to drop your nuggets of comments, say happy Juneteenth, say whatever, right in the comments, right? So I was just about to tell the Juneteenth story from my perspective.
Right.
And I started with talking about my personal ancestry. So I ran ancestry.com, the DNA, and I found out that I am Nigerian, which was amazing.
Right.
You know, because other ethnicities, they know where they're from.
Yes.
They can track back when they came to America. I couldn't.
Right.
But I used DNA to find that out. And in terms of the other part, like the more recent history, is my father's family. We could track that back to New Jersey, going all the way back into the 1800s and probably before.
Yeah.
So I've always been a Jersey girl. I have my dad's family has been in Jersey for a long time. But my mom's family is Greeleyville. So my mom's family, that we track my mom's family back to Greeleyville.
South Carolina.
South Greeleyville in the house. Represent, you know, and then my interestingly enough, my grandfather, who's on my grandfather on my mom's side, he when they came to his house to do the census, it they first year 10 years they said he was mulatto, and then that second time they came 10 years later, they changed it to black. Right, but you just see, right? That is interesting, right? So it's like, okay, at one point being of mixed race was something that they would classify as mulatto,
right? And
then 10 years later, nope, you're black. But anyway, we love it. Yeah. And you know what Cynthia and I are here to talk about is, hey, Davon is in Africa.
Hey, Davon.
Davon is on. What we're here to talk about is Juneteenth, just to have a conversation, to give everybody, you know, someplace where we can have this conversation about what Juneteenth is. And I tell you, even my mom was like, I just want to know what it's about.
Right.
You know, and it's important for all of us to celebrate this holiday because it is U.S. history. And it's nothing to be upset about or sad about.
It happened.
And
we acknowledge it and we honor our ancestors, and we have to keep it going.
We have to. We have to, you know. So just getting into the conversation, January 1st, 1863. Everybody says Lincoln freed the slaves.
Right.
Right? Emancipation Proclamation signed, and it said that slavery ended. So for people who look like me, people who have my ancestry, that was a big deal, right?
Right.
It was a lot, because can you imagine 1863? So your family has been here at this point, some since the 1600s.
Right.
And here it is 200 years later, and now you're free. Like, what does that mean?
That's true.
What do you do?
What does that look like?
What does that look like?
Yeah.
You know, what does that look like? What do I do? How do I go from here? How do I eat? You know, a job. I haven't had a job. I've been an enslaved person all these times.
Right.
So that had to be interesting just in general along that time. And then, you know, and we could talk about General Sherman too.
Right.
Right. Because everybody has heard the story of 40 Acres and a Mule, right? You know, and in 40 Acres and a Mule, General Sherman comes through and he's giving everybody, because basically Africans said we can support ourselves, and we've been doing this, we can make it work, you know. And I was talking to somebody from Britain's Neck, and they told me that General Sherman actually came up through Marion County, right? But then head up to Columbia. But it was kind of interesting to kind of hear that whole story. I would like to dig a little bit more into that. So, but anyway, 1863, slaves free. 1865 in Texas, they still didn't know.
Right.
They still didn't know. So what do you think, Cynthia, happened from January 1st, 1863 to June 19th, 1865?
They continue to work. They continue to be the slaves in their area.
Wow. You know, so that is mind-blowing.
Right.
You know, that they continue to work under those horrible conditions. You know, and we can have conversations another day about the conditions of slavery, you know, but one of the people that I admire in history is oh my goodness, I want to say Thurgood Marshall, but I do admire him, but he's not the one. I'm thinking of Frederick Douglass. Right. Frederick Douglass. And the stories he tells about the rations of clothes or cornmeal. So like when we think about like the meals of food that African Americans have mastered today, it goes back to those rations of food. You know, he talked about you would get like a I forgot the word he used, but a burlap bag of cornmeal. And what do we do with that cornmeal today?
Cornbread.
Cornbread. Put it on some fish, right? We put it on some fish, we get catfish.
That's right.
You know, so it's just so interesting. And then like the native food that we brought from Africa, the yams.
That's right.
You know, that yams, okra, those things came from Africa. So let's go back. Let's go back to 1865 in Galveston, Texas, was it?
It was.
So Galveston, Texas, 1865. Slavery had been long gone, but here comes the cavalry. And get this, y'all, when the cavalry came to give them the news that slavery had ended, not last month, not now, but you know, a couple years ago. Give them the news, they were African American soldiers. So here they are, African American soldiers coming to tell you that your life of oppression is over. And they look like you, and you have never seen a Black soldier. Like you've never in your life have never seen a Black person in a position of authority.
That's right.
The only Black people you saw were other slaves or were other enslaved people, you know, or free Africans. Right.
In America.
On this side. But then, or you saw, even if you saw free Africans, right, they lived in fear.
Yeah.
They had to carry papers. Almost sounds a little bit like what's going on now. But, you know, they had to carry papers, you know, so you didn't see a whole battalion of Africans coming and saving you.
That's true.
So, wow. And the party that they had.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you celebrate?
Can you imagine?
I cannot. I cannot. I totally get why they celebrated.
Yeah.
Why Juneteenth was created. Because it's like, we're free and you're telling me that I'm free, so I can trust you.
Right.
You know, because if anybody else had told them, I don't know if they would have believed it.
I don't think so.
Yeah. You know, so here they are. And so guess what? What do? We celebrate.
Continue the celebration.
Yes. And you know, just think about 1776, what that means, and July 4th.
Yeah.
What do we do on July 4th? Fireworks, food, right? It's the same. So for those that are not from our culture, think about if we can help you to relate to why we feel so awesome about Juneteenth and why we celebrate. It's the same feeling that we all get on 1776.
That's true.
Except for 1776 and 1865. So my ancestors in 1776
couldn't celebrate.
They couldn't celebrate. No, they really couldn't. They really couldn't. So when we talk about Juneteenth, that gives us even more of a reason. No, we're happy. We're more than happy. We are. This is the only country that we know for hundreds of years. So we are vested in the United States of America.
That's true.
I think more so. Our love for this country is more so because we sacrificed so much. Millions of Africans have bled and died for this land. Millions.
And so that we also can have a prosperous life.
All of us. All of us. So when we think about, Juneteenth, and we think about those Africans that that really built our country, and that made this ultimate sacrifice, and then they didn't even find out for 2 years that they were free. That's why we celebrate.
That's right.
And as an African American, as a person of African descent, it just really makes me feel good. So on that note, you actually you have a family member that you guys have studied. Like, I just know Nigeria, and I know Greeleyville because that's where my mom was raised at, right? And that's where my grandma was born.
Yes.
But you have a family member. Y'all have done some more digging. More.
Yes.
Who's that?
Oh my goodness! Shout out to everyone who is an ancestor or descendant of Putu Gushila. I was just excited when I learned about Putu and everything that means to me, and what it means to my family. And he was right here in Marion County. He was in Mullins.
He was Putu, because I took him with me for Black History Month.
Right.
But Putu was right here in Mullins.
He was in Mullins. Yeah, that's just amazing to me. And I was researching, on my end, but didn't realize there was already family members who had captured that information and found out that he was from Nigeria. And they found the tribe and everything. And so in my digging, I came across the information that family member already had. I had a book and all,
Wow.
And I was just excited to see that, and just pairing that with information that I was gathering on both sides of my family.
And so we're talking about Putu Goshalar. Let me go ahead and put that up at a banner so they can see. Putu Goshalar. And so what family, you said because your last name is Ford.
Yes, my last name is Ford. So to kind of quickly trace it down, Putu was the father of Moses, and then Moses had William, and William and Jenny had Lizzie, and Lizzie and Luke had Bishop, and Bishop and Sally had Lizzie, my grandmother. And then my grandmother had Olin. And so here I am, the daughter of Olin and Cynthia.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up. Tell me if I'm spelling it right. There you go.
Yeah, they'll get you if you don't have the spelling right.
Did I write that spelling right? Jusha?
G-O.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, G-O. They'll get you about it.
G-O?
Yeah, everything else was correct.
G-O.
Yeah,
but S. Only one O.
Yeah, but it's just exciting just to see how the family he has a huge extension of family, from his children and his children's children, and they just overflowed into all parts, not just Marion County, but we're all over. And so finding that information about him was just valuable to be able to see his name in print and how he was sold to the Reeves family here in Mullins. And then, of course, they started naming our family Reeves, and then it just went from there.
Well, think about that, right? So Putu, we don't know exactly what year he was born, but we know when he died.
Right. Yeah, it lists somewhere around 1790, somewhere around that time.
And when did he pass?
1800s. It was the late 1800s.
So he would have been alive in 1863.
He was. I think it was 1892, I think.
1892. So can you imagine being born an enslaved African and then seeing freedom? See that, another reason why to celebrate, right?
Right.
So, I keep saying July 4th because that's kind of the spirit, right? It's an upbeat, exciting. It's not a sad day. It's a day that we celebrate our freedom.
That's right.
And our freedom is really when I would want to say, even though it was a very difficult time, we had Reconstruction and all of that happened after.
Yes.
It was a very difficult time in America. That's the day when we as a people were also moving forward.
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
And so let's go back to Putu a little bit. So Putu, the story goes, is that he was a chieftain from Africa.
Right. He was the son of a chieftain.
Son of a chieftain from Africa. So, because enslaved people at that time, a lot of times when you see pictures or you see movies and you look at people who were enslaved, you think they were older.
Right.
But they were not. They were young people. They were 13, 14, 15, 16 is usually the max.
Yes.
So he was a young man.
Right.
You know, that was captured. So when he gets to Mullins, this is what I told people that blows me away. And it tells me a little bit about you too, Cynthia, is that he wouldn't change his name.
Yeah.
He would not change his name. To the day he died, he was what? To the day, and he was 100. And that's the other thing, the average age, the lifetime of an enslaved African was in the 30s.
Yeah.
You know, he pushed it through and wouldn't change his name. You know, man, that's something else.
Yeah,
that's something
true.
else. That's something, you know, something for us to be excited about and celebrate. And, you know, we don't have the people to tell us the stories, but you could just think about, that's you know, what it would have been like.
Yeah. And you know what makes another big difference for me is his son Moses, which would have also been a grandfather for me. In looking at the history in the documents, how he left money to his children to be split up. So $16.07 to be split up. And Moses was born a slave too, but of course he acquired his freedom before he passed. But in the documents here in Marion County, someone who was born a slave but was able to think further enough in the future to say, I want to leave a legacy for my children. Not just money, but just a legacy for my children. Right. That was deep for me. And then when he talked about his father, he mentioned that his father, Putu, was from Africa. Wow. So just keeping that connection and then just, you know, connecting the family and saying, I'm leaving you $2 and, you know, some change. That was a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah. And this is history right here in Marion County.
Right.
You know, and so when President Biden, when he was in office, he was the one that made Juneteenth a federal holiday,
right?
Which is a big deal.
Yes.
I actually had the pleasure of meeting the woman that lobbied President Biden, and her name was Ms. Opal Lee.
Yes.
And oh man, she's just sweetest lady, yes. And so in Texas. Juneteenth is new to the rest of the country. The rest of the country, we are now celebrating Juneteenth, but I'm told there's a party every year.
Right.
In Galveston, Texas. Right? So this is just kind of, you know, a celebration that thank you so much, Madam Opal Lee has brought to the rest of us.
That's right. Yeah, her determination in walking from Texas to Washington 2 miles per day until she got there.
I did not know that.
2 miles.
So tell the story.
So she was very determined to.
And keep in mind, how old is she now?
She's in her 90s.
She's in her 90s right now. So
she's in her 90s, and so even then, she walked from Texas 2 miles per day until she got to DC to make sure that, you know, people understood the impact and why we needed this as a federal holiday. Now, it's not a holiday for all states, and we're still working on that in South Carolina. I have been putting my bits out there for South Carolina, and congratulations to North Carolina for making it official today to bring, Juneteenth to be a state holiday in the state of North Carolina. So South Carolina, we still have some work to do.
So does that mean that state offices are open today?
Yeah, they're open unless.
Even though the federal is closed.
Yeah, they are. South Carolina, you do not have to be closed today because it's not a state holiday. So I have been asking since 2021, I've been asking why has South Carolina not made it a state holiday? Now, someone did propose it. Mr. Jackson proposed it in the State House. So thank you, Mr. Jackson, for making it important enough to bring it forward for us. And it's just been pending. It's just been sitting there since 2021. How do I remember it? I was sitting there on orders, with the military. And in 2021, the day before, it was like, oh, we don't have to work tomorrow because, President Biden made it a holiday. So the next day we had that day off. And it was just, amazing for me just to have that feeling to finally recognize it as a federal holiday but still on the end, people, my family in South Carolina couldn't celebrate.
It's interesting. That is pretty cool. I remember when Juneteenth became a holiday. We were planning our first Juneteenth Mullins event.
Right.
And and the idea for Juneteenth Mullins actually came from Terry Davis. I don't know where or how. I wish she was here so she could tell like what made her say. But she said to me, she said, "Miko, next year we're going to celebrate Juneteenth in Mullins." And I was like, "Okay, Miss Davis."
Yeah.
Because Miss Davis, she is somebody. She's a councilwoman in the city limit of Mullins, and she's legendary. She's truly legendary. When she speaks and tells you what you're going to do, you're going to do it. So I said, okay. So we start planning Juneteenth Mullins. We have this planning team together. And while we were planning is when the holiday became official. We celebrated.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, we're going to have this celebration. And you all are going to get off on Monday. Hey, that is so cool.
I will tell you, I was actually planning to go to Atlanta because there was a huge celebration in Atlanta that same time, of course, for Juneteenth Mullins. And it was Councilwoman Terry Davis. I was like, "Oh, we're having one here in Mullins. Please stay and come to the one."
And you did?
I did.
There you go. There's that Terry Davis again. So if you think about, let's go back to Putu a little bit. I want to just stay on this for just a little bit. And, if you guys have any questions, I have Cynthia 04 to Arthur Rest. She's here with me, and we're just having a conversation about Juneteenth. We would love to know if you all have any questions, any topics that we should just chat about. But let's go back to Putu. So Putu, here he is, the son of a chieftain. So even when he was in Africa, he lived a different life than the rest of us. And then he comes here to America, ends up in Mullins, refuses to change his name, but all of his children, they took on Reeves. So he's like, okay, but not me.
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah.
To the day I die. Even when he was willed.
It still shows Putu on the will.
In one, it's like, and here's the other thing I found very interesting is that information of the movement of slaves is in the probate office in Marion County.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's how we were able to find out about the money that Moses left his children.
Wow.
Yeah.
So no wonder you guys are the Reeves. I tell you, they're something else. But we all have stories like that, and I would love to know your story. If you're watching us on Facebook and you having a story of an ancestor that you've been able to track, let's elevate that person, right? Let's elevate those families because it helps us all, And I tell you, Cynthia, I do feel sad sometimes, because I'm from Jersey,
right?
And everybody go around the room. Well, my family's from Italy. They came here, such and such. My family is Irish, and this is when they came here. And then it's like, I don't know. So that's again even more reason why we celebrate Juneteenth the way we celebrate it, with a party.
That's right.
Because it gives us something to connect to, something to say, oh.
Yeah, what makes me sad is the fact that we still have people who think it's a holiday that we made up. We didn't make it up. And also we have, if you see the posts on social media, sometimes there's people that will laugh about it, like, oh, here they are with their made up holiday, and you'll see the laughing emoji. Well, to me, it's not funny. And it says a lot about you as a person if you're laughing about it, and the lack of cultural sensitivity that you have for another race. So don't laugh at another race or group because of a holiday that they choose to celebrate and that we're awarded to celebrate because it's a law. I mean, it's federal now. So,
and even, it's not a federal law, but Irish, what's that they celebrate? Green.
Yeah.
Help me. What's that holiday?
In March.
Green in March. What is that holiday, y'all?
I can't even think about it.
What's the holiday? The green holiday in March. Everybody wears green. It's the Irish day.
I can't even think now.
Goodness gracious! What's that holiday?
I can just clearly see it.
Okay, somebody's going to tell us in comments. St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, St. Patrick's Day. I'm still here thinking about other things in the store.
Right, but it's a celebration, right?
Yes,
And I'm
yes.
gonna be honest with you, I don't know the history behind St. Patrick's Day.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. But I know they are having a good time.
Right.
And we don't laugh,
Mm-hmm.
banks will say happy St. Patrick's
That's
Day.
true.
Walmart will have St. Patrick's Day themes, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody's okay with that.
Right.
So, and again, this conversation is so that, thank you, Davon just told us on St. Patrick's Day, that we, that this live, when Cynthia and I was talking and we decided to do a live, it's so that we could enlighten
Mm-hmm.
folks,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we really hope that everybody of all nationalities would listen to the conversation and join in.
Right.
Because, and I hear you, it hurts my feelings too when they laugh.
Mm-hmm.
It hurts my feelings a lot when they laugh or when they purposely leave it out. When they happy federal holiday.
Right.
That hurts.
Exactly.
No, it's Juneteenth.
Yeah.
Right?
Acknowledge it. And
acknowledge
we're
it.
not, blaming them for what happened. We weren't here.
Right.
But we will acknowledge that it did happen.
Exactly.
We will celebrate that there was freedom.
There was freedom.
We will acknowledge what our ancestors had to go through.
Yes.
And we have to tell the story so it doesn't happen again.
And it's no different than anybody else.
Right.
That has had moments in history that have been very trying.
Right.
It just so happens that ours was 200 plus years to freedom, and then another 100 and some years of oppression.
Yes.
And I think it's because it's never really been dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately. But I thought about even today how I was not here during the times of oppression in that aspect. But my grandmother faced some things, but she still never taught me to hate another race.
That's it.
She told me the stories about, I was walking to school and these, people tried to spit on me or they threw rocks at me. My family, my parents never said, don't, love another race or hate another race. And I wasn't here during, time of segregation, but we still have people who are here, who are alive, who experience things that I never experienced. Now I experience the shift in the atmosphere of things that are still here because of the people that are passing it on to their children.
Mm-hmm.
I did experience some aspect of it, but I didn't have to experience just the massive impact of it. But even though hearing those stories, I don't hate another race. I still love all races, and I don't see people for their color. And I think that's which is hard. Pass on.
It is what we need to pass on, right? And when people say that, sometimes if you say I don't see color, it's kind of like you can get a bad rap for that, But I think when I say it or when I hear it, to me, is that we are all the same in God's eyes.
Correct.
Right? And so that's where, and when I'm our beloved Mullins, I always say we're 129-574.
Right.
We may disagree,
right.
But at the end of the day, we want the same things. We want our families. We want to be able to do what Moses did.
Right.
We want to be able to leave a legacy and inheritance down to our kids because, I didn't get it until I got this age, but losing my dad, it's like, wow, you don't live forever.
Mm-hmm.
I seriously thought my dad was gonna live forever.
Right.
And we will be back together again one day, but I mean physically, So, we all want the same things as people, as American citizens. And when it comes to Juneteenth, we really just want that respect of our holidays. And it would be so great if you join in.
Right.
Because I gotta say this, Juneteenth Mullins was a multicultural affair this year.
As it should be.
And it was so great, right?
Yeah.
It was so great. We had every race. It was white, it was black, Indian, Spanish, dancing with us. That's how it should be.
Yeah.
On July 4th, it's multicultural.
Exactly.
We all wear our red, white, and blue.
Yes.
You're too young to remember. You was not born. But in 1976,
wasn't here.
I was 7. I was 7 years old, and I remember vividly decorating my bike red, white, and blue and being in the parade.
Wow.
It was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
And so America is about to celebrate 250. And so stay tuned because the city of Mullins is going to have a lot to do with that.
Okay.
Yeah, as America's about to celebrate 250 years. But we're okay to celebrate. We're happy to celebrate these things.
I'm good with it.
And so we're good with Juneteenth Mullins, right? Not Juneteenth Mullins, Juneteenth.
July 4th.
Juneteenth, July 4th, we celebrate together. So Josephine, she says, this is for you, Cynthia. OMG, you just spoke a mouthful, Cynthia. I treat you like you treat me. Some people, us is the problem. Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a mic drop moment.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Is she telling the truth?
Yeah, she is.
Wow. So why do we think that other African Americans don't celebrate?
I think that we have to be in control of the narrative. Okay. And it just depends on the narrative that they were given, not to say that they have to continue the narrative that they were given, but, you know, as a person, we all have to control the narrative and what we're passing on, the stories that we're passing on. I don't have a written letter from Putu, but I know about him because people pass on this story and they told about the story for generations and generations. So it depends on what you want your children to know. It depends on what you want your family to know, how you want your family to be treated, how you present yourself. That's what you're going to, you know, experience, you know, replicate back. So if you download this information in your children the correct way, then that's what's going to come out.
I agree. I so agree with that. And it's maybe they don't understand the story because, you know, like I said, my mom, she didn't understand the story. She didn't understand that because no, we didn't celebrate it, right? So we're not in Texas, and it wasn't a thing, you know. So she didn't understand that, you know, there was a time in 1865 that African American soldiers of African descent came to the shores of Galveston and told enslaved Africans, still enslaved Africans, almost 2 years later, they was free. And then they celebrated. Who wouldn't?
Well, another aspect of it is literacy. And Putu was not allowed to read.
He sure wasn't. Neither was Frederick Douglass.
So,
but you are.
And I'm writing, you know, and I could write his story. But the fact is that, you know, there are things that were kept from others, you know, from Blacks, from women who were not allowed to read. You know, it was illegal to allow you to read. Why was it illegal to allow you to read? Because they didn't want you to have that knowledge. What can you do with knowledge? There's so many things that we can do if we have the correct knowledge. Why was that not in my history books?
Right.
Why was I never taught about it until later on in life? And as soon as I found out about it, I continued to celebrate just like people from other states. And then I didn't just stop with celebrating myself. I shared it with other family members.
I love it.
You know, who didn't know. And I told them, I was like, this is something you need to pass on. This is something we never need to forget.
And that is really, you know, it's what we're leaving.
Right.
It's our legacy.
Right.
Right. And, you know, and certain things are kind of spontaneous too.
Yeah.
You know, when I see people that look like us and don't appreciate where our ancestors came from, I feel sad. I feel sad for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do. Because if you don't know where you've come from, oh my goodness, what about your descendants?
Right.
You know, and like I said earlier in the live, hey Cherie, to my friend from Charlotte. What I said earlier in the live is that I didn't know until I did a DNA and I found out that it was Nigeria.
Right.
And then you found out as you was researching your family's history and your family was able to go to the probate office. So, you know, I think we could just pray for them.
Well, the blessed thing about that, they already had this information way before I started researching. Years before I even, you know, found them. They had this information. They wrote books already.
So then you was like, hey, it just started to fly off the shelf.
Yeah, it was already there and laid out. So
Kelly Williams wrote a book.
Who
Kelly Williams.
Oh, yeah.
She wrote a book, and her book is I Am My Ancestors'
Wildest Dreams.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she mentioned him in her book.
Exactly. So we were all kind of researching in our little pockets, not knowing they were already researching. and had
Oh, we're talking about
information.
Putu Goshalar, y'all.
Yeah.
If you're just coming in, Putu Goshalar he was a son of a chieftain in Africa. Young man. I hate to say young man. These were kids. You know, between 13 and 16. You know, ended up in Mullins as an enslaved African, and that's her ancestor. So we're talking about, if you just came in, just came on, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
And when we're talking about Josephine gave us a comment about African Americans that poo poo on Juneteenth.
Yeah.
You know, but that's crazy. We celebrate July 4th. You know, we celebrate freedom. This is just another way. And you know, can I tell them what happened? I'm gonna tell them about our outfits. So her and I, we were talking. We said, you know what? Let's just get on live and just have a conversation, right? Let's have a conversation about Juneteenth. And I said, okay, well, let's go live. And so I said, well, meet me in my office. So she shows up and we are twinning. This was not on purpose.
No, it wasn't.
Not at all. So some things just have some spontaneous. Let's see. Actually, Juneteenth was pulled way back because they made July 4th for celebration. Well, you know, and this is Josephine. She said, you know, July 4th was a celebration and Juneteenth was not. But you know what? That's okay. Because now we're going to celebrate both.
It is now.
Right? We're going to celebrate both.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think that who knows what it was like in 1777.
Yeah.
And 1778, right? Where you know, there was still some people that wanted to be tied to the queen.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There was one, I'm sure.
There was one. So did they want to celebrate July 4th?
No, they were probably afraid.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So these are the early years, and you know, we hope that if you've watched this live, you watch it on replay, that and you kind of passed the part where y'all couldn't hear us.
About 3 or 4 minutes in.
About 3 or 4 minutes in, then you can actually hear us. You know, if you were able to watch this live, that you have the conversations with your friends and family.
You must.
You must. And not just the ones that are African American.
No.
And you know what? Those were all Americans. This is a federal holiday. And it is okay if you are of another descent and you ask somebody about Juneteenth.
Right.
It's okay. Let's have the conversation.
Right. You know, that should be a moment where that part of history closes the door as far as the enslavement portion, and we can unify on it and say, okay, well, this happened. Yes, this happened to Americans, and you know, where there was some sort of freedom in 1776. And then years later, here we have Juneteenth. All right, so we're all free now. Let Juneteenth be like a period. You know, and let it be a door closure to say, okay, we're all on the same ground now.
Yes.
Now let us come together somehow and celebrate.
And we could do it. We could do it. And I think that if you look at Mullins, that has to be an example. Because we did it. We did it, y'all. Yeah. All nationalities were at Juneteenth Mullins. And to the friend who was Indian and you were at Juneteenth Mullins, with us all day, by the way.
Yeah.
If you're on this live or you get this message, please reach out to me. I would love to have a conversation with you to get your feedback, what you thought, and you know, and then how we can incorporate others so others feel comfortable. You know, we want people to feel comfortable coming to our celebrations. And then I tell you, and then I promise we're going to wrap up. But just so much comes to mind. In Philly, so we didn't have Juneteenth. We didn't know what Juneteenth was, but we had, oh my goodness, folks will get mad at me in Philly. Adunde, that's it. We had the annual Adunde Festival, which happens around the same time as Juneteenth, right?
Right.
And Adunde is when Washington Street, I mean, it is packed with food, African food, African stilt walkers, dancers. It's awesome. And my dad took us every year. Every year we went to Adunde. And it was something, even as a little girl and not understanding, you know, my ancestry, it was something that I looked forward to. And it was multicultural.
Right.
And the drums would play. And when the drums play, it don't matter what your nationality is, people just start dancing.
Mm-hmm.
You just start moving to the beat, just moving to the drums.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just great. So I wasn't when Terry said we're gonna do Juneteenth Mullins here, Councilwoman Davis, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Because it's what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having that connection to people who came before.
Yes.
You know, so any final words?
That, that was really deep.
Cynthia.
Just having that connection, keeping the connection, and also continuing the legacy. Not just with our families, just like you said, or people of African American descent, but all cultures. Joining together. This is a day for all of us to celebrate.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Cynthia.
Thank you for having me.
Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth, y'all.